should write text about managing science in the meetings.
We could sing a song. Sing a song.
Again, Alex.
Shall I start? Okay. Well, good morning, all. Welcome to this panel on the relationship and hopefully interaction between science and technology on the one hand and diplomacy on the other hand. I have a very erudite and hands-on panel with me here today. I want to introduce Ambassador Murat from the Turkish Foreign Ministry, Anne-Marie from the Danish Foreign Ministry, Dr. Jovan Kurbalya, who was a student of mine 34 years ago and was a genius then. He's the father of digital diplomacy because together we founded the Pro Foundation. And Professor Özgün from Istanbul University, all over here. As an introduction, I want to start off with a little bit of jousting, a little bit of playing around with the definitions. Digital diplomacy. What on earth is it exactly? No one knows. There's a lot of confusion. Let's start from there. Without delving too much into the confusion right at the very beginning of the panel, let me suggest a very simple dissection of digital diplomacy. It is a set of new tools, a set of new digital tools for traditional diplomats who are struggling to catch up with changing times and new technologies. So these are the new tools coming through science and technology, which diplomats at different ages, look at my white hair, I'm one of the oldest diplomats, but the youngest diplomats are more in touch with the modern social media and new technologies. So you can even dissect by decades corps diplomatique to see who is in vintage 1, 2, 3 of technologies. And you know who you're talking to, and you know where he's coming from technologically. B, digital diplomacy can also mean, and is meant to convey a meaning, of being the whole area of diplomacy and negotiation taking place on how to govern electronic transmissions and what makes the digital a whole new world separate from the material world, although it is also material made up of submarine cables, wires, etc. That is a third area which the engineers usually go into. So you have digital diplomacy in 3 areas. Now the confusion is because in the EU, we as members of the EU and aspiring Turkey also, will be confused because there is cyber diplomacy, digital diplomats, cyber diplomats. But what I am saying is corroborated also by the US Congress report on digital diplomacy, a recent report, where they started off by saying there's a lot of confusion because there are so many names, cyber, digital, online, referring to so many different things. Then they move on to say, look, it is also about how we are meant to update our diplomats, to train our diplomats on how to handle best and to extract the best value added from their knowledge of the digital tools today available. Some digital tools are not sufficiently enhanced, so they're more difficult to download, let's use one of the mantras. Then there is the third area I'm referring to, which is the diplomacy about the digital, where you have internet governance fora taking place, World Summit on Information Society, the whole history which Jovan and I have been attending since it started in Geneva, Tunisia, and now the IGF's running into, I think, the 18th edition. So there you have a quick mapping. Now, let me start with Ambassador Murat. Turkey, under the Lowy Institute, has achieved a very, very high ranking for its impact on diplomatic achievement because of its quantity of new embassies coming out. But how much are you doing capacity building for technology, especially On one particular issue, which we discussed yesterday by ourselves, now I think we'll open it to the floor, we have this problem in diplomacy because the diplomats are no longer the gatekeepers of the external relations of the ministries. Each ministry in every country conducts its own international relations, perhaps due also to the UN agency. So health will go to the WHO. Finance will go to the IMF and World Bank. The more they conduct the foreign relations by themselves, the more the foreign ministry has to struggle and contain all those silos together. Have you found that technology, the new technology, is assisting to empower you? We from small states find that the new technologies empower us to come closer to a level playing field. How are you crisscrossing and cross-cutting these silos in Turkey from your experience in the Turkish foreign minister? Ambassador Moore, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Minister, and hello to everybody. I have just been appointed 2 months ago, actually, to this position, which is a new position in our ministry, and I will be in charge of science and technology diplomacy, which will be broader than just the digital world, the cyberspace. But I guess actually looking at it from a broader perspective could be, in a way, better because things are not staying at where they are now. Things which were mainly digital before are also becoming physical as well. Through Internet of Things and other technologies, automated vehicles, etc. Well, first of all, thank you for your praise for our foreign service. As Turkey, of course, we are trying to make use of technological innovations as much as possible and use it in our diplomacy as well. And this was one of the main reasons why we established this position. As you said, there are many components which are involved in diplomacy. Yesterday, I was listening to our foreign minister, and he was saying that diplomacy is changing. It's not just interaction between countries. There are various players. And if we look into science and technology, we see that this is developing even much faster. We have, on the one hand, governments, but then we have very big companies, which are very influential in all this. And then we have the academia as well that is involved. So the role of the diplomat has changed from just interacting through the agents of governments to a person who's involved with the business, with NGOs, with academia, and in terms of science and technology, this is even much more important. And there's always been science and technology in history, from the beginning of history up until now. But things are moving faster. That's another issue that we have. Every year, we look back, and the last year looks like something far back in history. I remember when I first entered the ministry, which was more or less 30 years ago. We only had 1 or 2 photocopiers, which were like precious technology. And we had the mechanical typewriters. And if we made one small mistake, we would have to type the whole thing again. And we had typists. So basically, we would go to the typist and dictate or just handwrite and give it to her, and she would type. And it was so archaic. But that's only 3 decades ago. Now we are talking about artificial intelligence. And maybe we won't even have to touch the keypad anymore. We just talk to the computer and get the report. We may not even have to even talk. The computer could be listening to us and writing the report now as well. So in that sense, things are developing very fast. And there are many different agents private sector, NGOs, academia. And as you said, there are many different ministries and institutions that are involved within the government as well. So in Turkey, for example, we have the Digital Transformation Office. We have the Ministry of Industry and Technology. We have, for example, the Competition Authority, Telecommunications Authority, so many actors. And of course, with things moving very fast, we need to do a lot of coordination. And our ministry is trying to coordinate, but more than coordinate, facilitate, to be helpful to our other institutions. Because as the Foreign Ministry, we are not the institution that basically creates science and technology. It's our other institutions that are much more involved in this process. But as the ministry, we try to help and facilitate, and I guess this is the basic job of a diplomat in all ages.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. May I turn to you, dear Anne-Marie? I have a question for you because of your own particular background, which is a challenge that you were based in Silicon Valley, in the Danish Foreign Ministry, in China. Let me provoke you with this challenge. In teaching young diplomats, we tell them, watch out, there is a sickness in diplomacy called local-itis. That when, say, Malta's ambassador in Rome, in Italy, is there for 4 years, he starts telling us, the Italians want us to do this, instead of telling the Italians, Malta wants to tell Italy to do this. So he turns, he becomes local, he goes local. Now, in tech and science, we have this also with norms, because it happens also in international organizations. Our representative at the WHO, at the World Health Organization, will be telling our health minister, you have to introduce these new injections, you have to introduce these. And we tell them, we don't even have the budget for that. Now, science and technology, from your experience in Silicon Valley, did it become the tail wagging the dog in Copenhagen? Did Silicon Valley become the big force that you had to balance because you are meant to be projecting your national interest to Silicon Valley? Is it in the national interest to have the tail wagging the dog?
My good friend, he's the Danish ambassador in France, and whenever I'm with him, he insists that we have French wine, even though I might say I'm a bit more to Italian wine. And so I think the argument that localization, embedding yourself somewhere, means something. I also think the most important thing about diplomacy, and since the first diplomat was sent out 250 years ago, we sent them to places of great national interest. I believe that the first diplomat was a Brit sent to Spain. The first one that we sent was probably to Germany, a country that we are deeply engaged with on trade. We've been at war with, I think, ever since anyone can remember. We have a big part of land between Germany and Denmark that every 100 years it changes flags. So of course, as a diplomat, you will be embedded and you will try to see both sides. I think it is naive of us to believe that a relatively small but mighty country, the Kingdom of Denmark, can entirely influence a tech sector that if we look at who has the biggest impact on Danish industry, Danish democracy, Danish norms, values, our ability to create security and peace, is that Spain? Is that Germany? Is it Google? Is it Meta? And while the answer is probably not one of them, but a combination, the representation to big tech for us is a realization that diplomacy today is operating in a different world. And that's why the third wave of diplomacy, the first one was to send diplomats out to countries. The second one, happening about 70 years ago, was to send diplomats to multilateral organizations. The third, and now, is the fact that the technological change, one, there's the pace. From when Carl Bildt sent the first email as a head of state to Bill Clinton back in 1992, it still took 2 decades for our diplomacy to go fully non-paper. When I wrote a diplomatic cable in December of 2022 talking about ChatGPT, until a year later, it had changed how we do exams, how we think about homework. It has prompted every single hospital in Denmark to think about how can you use generative AI. Every single ministry is now thinking about it, and it's catapulted our entire industry to thinking about how do we actually use AI. So the pace is changing, the scope. It touches upon much more. And thirdly, it is led by a group of actors that we previously did not have diplomatic relationships with, and more importantly, that are often operating outside the rule of law. They're operating in a vacuum. They're operating in areas because we don't have international legislation on it yet. We don't have international norms. And so yes, I mean, not only my accent, it's pretty American. I actually lived for quite a long time in Britain, but it was the Americans that convinced me of at least an accent that sticks. My role has been as a bridge builder between some of the most influential companies on this planet and forcing them into a conversation about what is your foreign policy. Mr. Musk, what is your foreign policy and whether you're going to let Starlink give the front line of Ukraine internet or not? What are the content moderation policies that are detrimental as we're going into an election year where about half of the world's population is going to vote? How are you addressing generative AI where a fake video shown a day before an election, we might find out later it is fake, but if it has the impact that you're going to vote differently, it has already done the damage. And that diplomatic dialogue, which I find to be both critical and constructive, is necessary as long as they have the type of power over our individual nation states. What makes my job easier is that I'm not alone in Silicon Valley anymore. I have Turkey. I have more, Diplo Foundation was the OG of this work. But today, more than 35, 40 countries have tech digital ambassadors who are increasingly taking up the baton of this challenging diplomatic dialogue with some mega companies that have so much influence over our lives. And while we, from a European perspective, try to catch up with legislation, I think it would be naive if we think that we're going to be able to regulate our way out of this. And so that's where diplomats, I think, can do what we've done for centuries, where there are challenges, where there are conflicts, the power of dialogue, and the power of a conversation, trying to force ourselves into a room where they also see our perspectives is at least a way forward.
Thank you very much. Let me turn to Jovan now, who was a student of mine 32 years ago. And
that was about age.
And he was a genius then, and he's been proven a genius since then, because he is the father of digital diplomacy.
Can I have it in writing?
Yes, of course, and with a guarantee underneath also. Because Jovan has developed so many novel applications of science and technology into diplomacy. I think what we want to hear from Jovan is not the whole history of it, we don't have the time, alas, but the latest of how science and technology can empower foreign ministries, especially small states foreign ministries, because of the novel ways of crunching data, which usually, traditionally, it used to take us weeks sometimes to crunch data coming in, and then try and assess it, try and put an analysis of it and corroborate it. Jovan, you've got the floor.
Thank you, Alex. Let me just comment on what Anne-Marie just said, which is crucial for understanding everybody doing research. There are young people here. Digital or tech or online diplomacy, whatever you use it, is about continuity and change. Continuity of the oldest function of diplomacy, to engage. Since our far predecessor jumped from the tree somewhere in Serengeti in Tanzania, they had to run away from whatever lions, but then they started negotiating with other tribes. That's the same. Empathy, negotiation, compromise. It's continuity. And it will continue even in AI era. And then you have a change. From the smoke signals to telegraph, telephone, internet, and now AI. That's basically, it's important to keep that in mind and the zoom out view, because sometimes we tend to be, let's say, chrono-narcissistic. We think everything is happening now and here. Well, people were discussing chatting for a long time. Back to your question, three concrete examples and anecdotes around this, what you introduce as geopolitics, trinity of digital diplomacy. Geopolitics, new topics on diplomatic agenda, new tools. Geopolitics. People who are following us here, if there is any major cut with submarine cables, let's say in the Red Sea, and there were a few incidents, they won't be able to see us on Zoom or broadcasting from this room. Sometimes we are not aware how fragile is a global internet infrastructure. You have a few cables, 17 cables crossing the Atlantic Ocean, laying in the bed or seabed somewhere in the middle of the ocean, quite exposed to potential risks. And that's, let's say, geopolitics, which we have to discuss as there is no any serious protection of this critical infrastructure of humanity. Second point, 2 years ago, I was invited to contribute paper on some book which related on topics on diplomacy. And I told them, listen, I'm not anymore contributing papers to traditional books because what will happen in 2 years completely will change the content and of the book. It was prestigious house, and they were sort of, oh, you're arrogant. And I said, no. And they called me recently and said, oh, you were right. I said, okay, that's it. And we are now introducing on the topics of diplomacy, on AI, digital, permanent writing of the books. There is a basic text, but with the help of AI, we are basically permanently writing a book and having every 6 months closure. This is the version on the 1st of January. This is the version of 1st July. You can print and you have it. Third point, Alex, back to your question, is about tools. We are now experimenting with AI-based reporting from international meetings. And that is going to change diplomacy completely. Because if we record this meeting, we can have detailed analysis, what I said, what Anne-Marie, what the other panelists said, what are our connections in our conceptualizes and thinking. And what we did with UN General Assembly, we analyzed all speeches on 193 states. 1 hour after the session, we had complete report. One diplomat told me, I said, how many days you would need for this report? And his estimate is 10 days for deep analytical report. And our estimate, I'm based in Geneva, and I work for Swiss Maltese Diplo Foundation. We estimated that 50% of diplomats' time is dedicated to reporting. Yes. Back to capital, to UN agencies, to treaty bodies, to other things. If that profession, that part of the daily routine is computerized and automated, that will be the major change in diplomacy. And it's happening now. We can share the links to the reporting that we do from UN Security Council. I think this session will be reported as well, whatever is broadcasted online. There were these 3 changes. A relatively traditional one, submarine cables, but critical for humanity. Second one, fast changes about the topics. And basically obsolescence of traditional publishing, among other things. And third one, change in diplomatic reporting, one of the key activity of diplomacy. We shouldn't forget, Alex, the first embassy in Milan in 15th century was established to keep archives of the communication. The first ministry in France with Richelieu in 17th century was established around archives. Therefore, archives, collective memory, reporting is so crucial. Therefore, those are 3 concrete changes which are happening as we are now discussing. It's not something abstract, it's basically reality.
Thank you very much, Jovan. Very illuminating as usual. Professor Özgün, perhaps you can guide us a little bit with your background in already writing a fantastic book on the new diplomacy, where you tackle some of these points that are arising over here. I'll just give you one example to crunch on. I'm just coming back from Abu Dhabi yesterday, where I was leading a delegation to the World Trade Organization Ministerial Conference. And we had a cliffhanger on a subject which has these elements. Since 1998, we have been extending every year no customs duties on electronic transmissions between states. During this conference, India, South Africa, Indonesia, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and finally also Brazil came out against extending this. Can you imagine if we have to start with customs duties on electronic transmissions? Now, where would this be its location? In the Trade Ministry, in the Foreign Ministry, in the Technical Ministry, in the Finance Ministry for customs duties? Or can they all come together to crisscross and cross-cut the silos and to tackle this problem that is coming through? The new diplomacy.
Thank you very much, and welcome, our distinguished guests. So I'm a professor of international relations and focusing on the area diplomacy for approximately 20 years' time. And at the beginning of the millennium, we were discussing public diplomacy, which is a new phenomenon, which used to be a new phenomenon. Now we even cannot follow up the technological developments and their adaptation to diplomatic studies. So I wanted to write a book about new types of diplomacy. Then I recognized the wording new types or new diplomacy has been already changed, and then I gave the name to my book, New Diplomacy. So there's a big discussion in academia, which is new or what is new when we talk about the diplomacy. So the way of making diplomacy or diplomacy itself, practical diplomacy itself, or the tools. So it was really a good question to start with and to ask in this panel, what is really digitalized? So the diplomatic practice, the tools, or the way of making diplomacy. So I am coordinating a digital diplomacy EU project, a big project, and it has been approximately 4 years that we are working on this project. And we have been working with lots of European countries, and I'm the coordinator of this project. At the end of this project, we try to build a digital diplomacy training module. So it's a curriculum development project. And the output of the project will be the training module, which we are going to serve to the whole academia in all over the world, and also to the Minister of Foreign Affairs. So even in the trainings, even in the process that we create this module, there's a huge discussion that whether this digital diplomacy or digitalization of everything are going to be permanent, or these are like temporary changes, like there was a telephone diplomacy and the mission completed, then something new came. So I just came yesterday night from this intensive program in Slovenia, which we taught nearly 50 people how to deal with these issues. And the reason that we are discussing this is also, like Jovan said, you create something, or you write a book or an article, or you develop a module, you teach students, then in each year, each month, something new came. So this is quite risky. And when we talk to diplomats from the field, we see that they are really skeptical about all these digital things. So creating a training module for all the academia, we are also skeptical about the future of this digitalization of diplomacy. So what is going to be changed? This is the main question. And of course, in the literature, it has been also discussed hybrid diplomacy, for example. So COVID-19 was a quite exception regarding to this because it also showed us that the way of making diplomacy can be also changed. But then the pandemic is over and we turn back to the traditional methodologies, traditional way of making diplomacy as well. So we can say that the diplomacy is at the crossroad, mixing traditional ones and digital ones. And we need some time to observe, still we need some time to observe whether all this traditional methodology is going to be changed in practicing diplomacy or not. So like Ambassador Atesh said, there are developments in the field, but as an academic, I'm also quite skeptical about the future of all this digitalization. This doesn't mean that we can just close our eyes to all these developments. Of course, the ambassadors or people practicing diplomacy needs to be also aware of this and needs to adapt their working styles also, all this digital. But as an academic, I would like to conclude this part saying that we need to have some more time to observe and to comment all these issues, because we even do not have a consistency of the conceptualization. So there is a mixture in people's minds, even working on diplomacy in academia, about the concepts. So cyber diplomacy, virtual diplomacy, tech diplomacy, Twitter diplomacy, and what are they about? So these are all new types of diplomacies, according to me, but one of the problems is that the conceptualization is not clear, and also there are not enough set of rules or norms and protocols created in the literature. So there are big endeavors, for example, thanks to Oxford Digital Diplomacy Research Group, and thanks to Professor Cornelio Biola, for example, who created all the, who started to create all the literature regarding digital diplomacy. But if you follow the articles, books, this great group of people in Oxford Digital Diplomacy Research Group are discussing, the same questions are also being discussed there. So we will see.
Thank you, Professor. It's good. Let me come back to Ambassador Murad. In spite of the confusion on definitions, I think we have a rallying point coming up this year through the organization which convenes all states of the world, the United Nations, because the Secretary General has set a target with the Summit of the Future, regarding which he's been working quite assiduously, in spite of the UN being badgered because of its failure in Ukraine and in Gaza. We have the Summit of the Future. There is the Global Digital Compact for internet governance in all its aspects. I had deposited an idea at the WISIS, at the UN General Assembly, so that the internet's critical infrastructure would be recognized, like the Law of the Sea and other Malta initiative, as common heritage of mankind. And yesterday we saw Elon Musk suing Iran because they are not standing on to the original foundation principles. How is Turkey preparing for the Summit of the Future and the Global Digital Compact, where we are all going to be convened together to sign up on a new charter, as it were? And this, I think, will create a new focus. So from the beginning of the internet till the Global Digital Compact will be before, and then we will have from the Global Digital Compact a period after where we'll be referring to this charter. Do you see it as feasible? Is it too much of a challenge? Is it too little?
Yes.
Ambassador.
Well, I guess the main issue here is regulation and how that should be done. Now, technological innovation, as I previously said, is going very fast, and it's providing us with great opportunities in almost all sectors. It's creating a beautiful, nice life. But on the other hand, of course, there are all these challenges that come with developing technologies. There are dangers as well, especially in the digital world, but now more and more with artificial intelligence becoming more popular, we realize that artificial intelligence can do so many good things, but then it can also exacerbate or make worse a lot of the problems that we already have, such as discrimination, bias. It could end up with largening the digital divide as well, because some countries could benefit very rapidly from this, but countries that do not have the digital infrastructure may be just left behind. And all these developments, they also have a great impact on the employment part, the workforce as well. So we may have some people losing their jobs while new jobs are being created. We can also have the divide between those who have and who do not have within countries largen as well. So there are lots of things. And of course, this can only be solved with regulation and international cooperation, because these are all interlinked. These are global issues, so one country cannot do something while others are doing something else. So it is very important that there is international cooperation in trying to regulate all these new technologies. But of course, the biggest challenge is the speed. You are trying to regulate something, and next day, you're already falling behind. I think we should all endeavor to to put the right rules, not to prevent technology from developing, that's important, but also making sure that it does not damage human beings, that it's human-centered. And of course, when we talk of artificial intelligence, apart from all the dangers that it could create or the harms that it could cause, there's also the fear, maybe not for today, but for the coming decades, that artificial intelligence may reach a super intelligence level where it may be beyond human control. It sounds a bit fantastic at the moment, but we don't know because it's developing very rapidly. So taking all that into consideration as diplomats and as my country, we believe that regulation is important and that we should work for it, cooperate internationally, and hopefully reach the targets.
Thank you very much. Anne-Marie, on the Global Digital Compact, do you think this is just going to become 10 commandments left on the shelf to gather dust, or is it actually going to influence the way our nation states operate in the digital arena and the private sector too, because it does cover the multi-stakeholder formula that's been coming out of ICANN for the last 30 years. So there is promise that it is all enveloping. What's your reaction?
My hope is that it will be the latter. And right now, Denmark is putting all our weight behind a process that is trying to actually achieve something. I think we also got to be realistic that the multilateral system and our ability to find common ground in the UN is deeply challenged right now over issues that are not about digital and technology.
Yeah.
My fear is that if we do not come up with an ambitious global digital compact, we are missing an opportunity of a generation.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever I travel, and I spend about half of my time away from Denmark out in the world, what is in Europe sort of a deep-rooted concern around technology, in many parts of the rest of the world is a hope and an optimism and an expectation that technology can and will solve some of the most gnarly issues of our time. The climate crisis,
Right.
better access and equitable access to health and education. Millions of people on continents south of here, east of here, wanting better opportunities, better jobs, meaningful jobs, formal jobs, that artificial intelligence and new technologies and digitization is part of that. And so if we do not, I think, honor the commitments and opportunities and try to actually deliver on that hope with the Global Digital Compact, I think the challenges of finding common ground on other issues in the UN is going to be more difficult. I think that our shared ability to find solutions to all the issues I said before, I mean, we are 6 years away from reaching and supposed to be reaching the SDGs. I was in New York in September for the UN General Assembly. The statistics are terrible. We're not even halfway there. On a number of the most important, we are lacking behind. And I attended 15 or 20 events on technology for the SDGs, AI for the SDGs, and all of them were in the potential and the promise, but none of them really put pen to paper. And I think it is the digital divide. It is the fact that not only it's about connectivity and access to the internet, it is meaningful access. It is access to compute power. Every nation that has money right now is trying to buy an NVIDIA supercomputer. Those who don't, what is the opportunity for actually taking part in the AI revolution? We see quantum computer as an incredible opportunity. Denmark is quite advanced in this. It is also a security issue. Right. Who's going to be the first to develop a quantum computer? What values are going to be around it? How are we going to think about equitable access to the opportunities from quantum computing down the line? So the Global Digital Compact, I think if it falls through, we're all in deep trouble. And all of you who are diplomats in some way or another trying to work on this, do everything you can in your power to get at least an agreement on the table. And then after that, I'm going to Istanbul tonight to fly to California tomorrow. And next week, my engagement with the tech industry is to say, look, this is not just another UN agreement where you send one of your most junior people to sit in the back and overhear what might be said. This is your opportunity for showing that you care, that your promises about connecting the world and creating opportunities for all is actually valid, and that you put weight behind access to your technology, thinking about how are you going to be delivering on this. And then I think finally for me, the Global Digital Compact is also, obviously technology is not neutral. And so in a world, and I hope I still have the majority of my life in front of me, it's going to be in a very digital future. Is that going to be one granting more civil liberties? The ability for me and my family and generations that are at my age to live better, more meaningful lives, sustainable lives. And so the Global Digital Compact it doesn't end here, it starts here. But if it's a failure, the ability for us to then come back after that and find common ground is going to be tremendously hard.
Yeah. Anne-Marie, thank you very much for this very articulate defense of the Global Digital Compact, which is absolutely required. It's not in focus in the media, which is a big sin at the moment, because it is going to be our rallying point since the start of the internet, as I was trying to suggest before the Global Digital Compact and then after. Jovan, let me address you now on the other aspect, where you have major experience, because the Swiss government and the Maltese government confided in you to train their alumni, and you've got more than 7,000 of them to show off with, in capacity building on digital diplomacy. What can you tell us that will be relevant as a model for other foreign ministries, for other countries, for private stakeholders, capacity building for the Global Digital Compact and after?
Sure. Alex, it is a huge challenge. And on 20th March, if you are in Geneva or you basically can alert your missions, we'll be starting Diplo Academy's AI campus, where we are going to train, prepare people for diplomats for the AI era. Our principle is that to avoid situation which unfortunately many universities are following on banning AI, we are insisting that diplomats use AI because this is going to be their bread and butter in the future. What does it mean? To understand how it functions, to do so-called AI prompting, and that's an interesting method that we developed, that you use AI, but not to give a final assignment or paper, but through the process to get into the logic of AI. Therefore, there are huge changes ahead of us, and capacity building is on two levels, main levels. One is individual, to equip people with new skills. Young generation which is coming, but also, let's say, older generation which has a lot of knowledge, expertise, and experience that should be passed through for the future. Then there is the question of practical tools. We need these tools, and here is one good news. Small and developing countries, with the use of AI, can increase their impact in diplomacy. Because simply, some missions in Geneva have 4 or 5 people. you start in the morning with humanitarian, then you move to WIPO on intellectual property. You have to be a Renaissance person like Da Vinci. And they cannot cope it. But even bigger missions, I would say. AI provides this opportunity, and we are discussing with a few small missions from Africa to start that they have reports from all meetings. And let's say Djibouti is interested in maritime security. They may not have a person sitting in the disarmament meeting, but if somebody mentions, then a diplomat from Djibouti will receive literal alert. By the way, go to disarmament meeting, there is discussion on maritime security, which is, I'm just mentioning one example. Therefore, you need this sort of individual capacity building, and then you need institutional. And that will take a time, and diplomatic services will have to change. Traditionally, they were functioning of idea, you need to know principle. I'll send to Alex this text because I think that you may need it, to Anne-Marie the second text, to Ambassador, to other colleagues. That has to change, including traditional hierarchy. The new principle, which is introduced in most successful ministries, you need to share. You provide the data, information through AI, and maybe you will find the angle which I wasn't aware of, but you sitting in the mission in Copenhagen, in Silicon Valley, hey, you forgot that element. Therefore, ministries per se will have to go a really huge capacity development and change internally. Therefore, that's it, but I invite all of you on and I think we will broadcast on 20th. It will be completely, Alex and I started diplomatic training on digital diplomacy in 1992, and we have been adjusting to Twitter, Facebook, website, email. But now on the 20th of March, we will launch this AI campus, which is a really qualitative shift for ministries of foreign affairs, of building individual and institutional capacities.
Thank you very much, Jovan. That's a very clear rallying call for capacity building, which is so much required, not only in small states, I can tell you, but even in large states all around. Because this is going to be the key, especially after the Global Digital Compact, for our diplomats, old and young, to be able to handle efficiently. So, Professor Erkel, I would like to ask now, from your experience, from your teaching overseas, and with Turkey's expansion of missions throughout the world, how much are you seeing the possibility of engaging with local foreign ministries where your missions are going to be, in order to convey your teaching over there on the new diplomacy, on the new tools, on the new topics in diplomacy, because this is the syllabus of the new training. And as Jovan was correctly pointing out, the old method of a pyramidal structure in a foreign ministry, with instructions flowing down the hierarchy, and each one had to carry out that instruction, is now gone with much more fluidity of communication, because whereas before it was only the exceptional ambassador who took an initiative by himself without instructions, now there is so much symbiosis that it becomes a community. It's no longer just instructions, letter I coming down, but it's I initiative coming out and up and merging somewhere in between. So there is an influence also of the ambassador on the policy maker. It's not only policy being made by the top executive branch, and down here we have the foot soldiers implementing it. The foot soldiers are telling the general, you're sending us into our death, pull back that order. This is the new diplomacy, thanks to AI, where your information is going to be much more real-time information. You have the floor, Professor.
Thank you very much. Of course, there's a combination between these traditional ways, and we cannot ignore all these technological developments. And so, to be honestly, diplomats are not always welcome online tools, and but they also are aware of that they need to be adapted to the new tools as well. But digital diplomacy cannot always substitute the offline ways. And also, digital diplomacy is always not so much cost effective. We need to also keep this in mind. And generally, until now, digital diplomacy is much more shaped by the crises, especially with this COVID-19. And for example, we have examples like United States Embassy digital virtual embassy in Iran. So it is for overcoming the lack of physical presence of the embassy being there, and there is a practical need. And also we have the Tuvalu example, which is going to be, because of the climate change, which is going to be sinking and being under the sea level. So there are, sometimes there are needs, there are necessities or obligations, like US presence in virtual level for reaching the Iranian people. And it is not always being visionary and trying to create new policies. Generally, until now, as far as I observe, all these developments shaped combining the practical level and theoretical level because of the needs and some of the obligations. So we have huge influence on social media, and probably 90% of the UN members have digital Twitter accounts, everything digital in their embassies or digital departments in their ministers of foreign affairs. So this shows that there is a tendency, and we cannot close our eyes or ignore all these developments. But again, as an academic being skeptical, I am underlying that we need to have some more time to create all this literature, having the background experiences adapted to the field. So this is why it's hard to comment the issue now, and I really agree with Anne-Marie that if we ignore all these developments, we are going to lose a generation. And for example, in our project, we were having the slogan that we are trying to contribute to the training and the education of the future diplomats. So this future diplomats wording shows something, because all over the Europe, I'm not exaggerating, there are really rare numbers of digital diplomacy lectures, courses. I was in shock because in only UN courses, there are some summer schools or winter schools, but in regular curriculums of the traditional university training, there is nothing. And this module we are going to create will be the first. And of course, it has digital content, but still traditional content. And in 1 year time, we are going to finish this European Union project. And not all the time, the academia can also be adapted to the reality and to the practices happening in the field. So we are much more slower because we need to discuss first. But it shows something that in education level, Faculty of Political Sciences, Faculty of Law, Faculty of Economics, there are really rare numbers of lessons, courses, and curriculum even touching on the digitalization issue, not a digital diplomacy course. Typical diplomacy courses in typical ones, also there is no even a module or even a week focusing on the digital diplomacy. This shows something, and these people graduating from these faculties gonna be diplomats. So for future diplomats, we need to have them in educational level, and we need to expand the literature also among the professors, among the young scholars, trying to increase the literature and the interests of young scholars and students focusing on the issues. So there is a must. It is not always in practice. We need to also have it in academic level, and I would like to highlight this as I see young people around, and there is also a need for increasing the interest, even still.
Thank you very much, August. I think you are hitting the nail on the head, because it's not only the refinement of the digital tools for the practicing diplomat, nor, as Jovan added, even the institutions, the foreign ministries, But you are pointing that we need a culture through the Ministry of Education and a culture pro-digital, supporting the digital dimension in our lives. So we need all these layers put together, and I thank the organizers of the Antalya Diplomacy Forum, your President Erdogan and your Foreign Minister for having supported this initiative at Antalya, and of course this fantastic panel I was bestowed with here this morning in Antalya, Professor Murat, Anne-Marie, Jovan, Gus, and I hope that our exchange has given you a little bit of a spark, more than one spark, I hope, so that you will start downloading the many references we have given you over here, but most particularly, and I will end with this, go and read about the Summit of the Future under the United Nations website, in particular the Global Digital Compact, as that is going to be our new set of norms from that day in September onwards, capturing all our experience of the last 40 years and looking ahead, hopefully, for another 40 years. Interestingly, Anne-Marie, it's the US and China are both on this. So it is one plank in a platform where the US and China are again softening their otherwise nasty relations as they turned. So the geopolitical environment can also be helped by the Global Digital Compact. Go and download it, crunch it, discuss it. We are going to remain in touch through a group chat, and we will obviously be keeping in touch through Merv and Suhan here, so that anyone having any queries can put them forward. Unfortunately, I've got to rush to the airport, because otherwise I would have taken questions and extended this discussion. But thank you all for being here this morning. Thanks. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.